Welcome to the Self-Wealth Real Estate Podcast with your host, Luke Boiron. Today, I interviewed Ryan Carr. Ryan is a very experienced real estate investor. He's done everything from single-family investments. He kind of coined the term, the vertical split duplex. He's done land development, land assembly, infill development, and he has also been featured on HGTV, has his own podcast called The Highest and Best Used Podcast, wrote a book called The Highest and Best Used Playbook. Ryan's a friend, and it's always a great time when we get together and talk. He's a very experienced investor, and we share a lot of similar philosophies on investing in real estate. So thank you for listening to the podcast today, and I think you guys are going to love this one. Welcome to the Self-Wealth Real Estate Podcast with your host, Luke Boiron. Today, I have Ryan Carr on the show with me. Ryan is a friend, a very successful real estate investor, and the author of The Highest and Best Use Playbook. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
Ryan is also a host of the Highest and Best Use podcast, which I have been a guest on.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, you got your background ready and everything. I just have a couple masks and a sword behind me. I
love it. I love
it. So Ryan, tell us about your background before you got into real estate.
I was a mechanic, man. So this was pre-2012. I had gone to school to get my license to be an auto mechanic. I was fixing cars, and cars were really at that point what interested me. And as a mechanic, it was extremely fulfilling because it gave me the opportunity to really, to fix stuff and work with my hands and not be behind a computer. And that's what I always enjoyed, growing up as a kid. It was like go-karts and dirt bikes and this kind of thing. And I went to school, I got my license to be a mechanic. I worked as a mechanic for a little while. I started building armored cars for a little while, doing luxury hand-built SUVs, which, by the way, were super cool. So unrelated to real estate, right? Like not even the same vein. But they were neat. They were built out of the GTA, like just outside of Toronto. And all of these trucks had like cappuccino machines and Xboxes, and they were all bulletproof and like the 3-inch thick glass and all this stuff. They're amazing. But the challenge that we had with this company was after a couple of years, which is how long I was there for, they ended up going bankrupt. Well, when they went out of business, I was effectively unemployed. But during that time, while I was working for the armored car company, I had actually bought our first principal residence and then our first rental property. So, during that time while I was full-time employed, I was doing some of the real estate activities on the side, which is kind of how, once I got laid off, we merged into real estate. And then that's what started the business from there.
Nice. Yeah. Actually, it's interesting what you're saying about the armored cars, because that's always the story I've heard of how cars were, in the early 1900s before kind of the Model T and Ford kind of making that, the Model T Ford. Before that, cars were fancier and they had hair dryers in the cars and the umbrellas in the doors like a Rolls Royce or something, but they were all like, they were very custom and high end and they were incredibly expensive.
Yes.
And it was Henry Ford who made kind of who popularized the assembly line for cars and making them less expensive. And really what you don't see now is a line I love. I hope it's actually correctly attributed to him, but it was basically like, you can get a Model T Ford in any color you want, as long as it's black.
Black, yeah, that's right.
And I kind of like that. Like, I think about that for if I ever want to, an idea of mine is to build coach houses.
Yep.
But to get the cost of coach houses or garden suites or homes down, we build one or two sizes that are the most standard, that's going to fit in the most backyards. Mm-hmm. And basically, you get one layout, one finish, the most common. You're going to get a white shaker kitchen. You're going to get this flooring. Maybe you can pick a couple colors, but then it's going to be, the windows are going to be in these places. This is what you get.
Yes.
You can get this coach house in any color you want, as long as it's black, that kind of thing. So right. As a way to streamline, so you don't have to reinvent or even the people working on it don't have to okay, let's look at the layout and where are we going to put the windows on this and what color of this are we doing? No, everything's the same. Just do it over and over and over. You can kind of create, jigs and systems so that you can replicate anyway. So
yeah,
I love that.
Even dude, to that point, even back in the day, you mentioned fancier cars, Rolls Royce, Duesenberg, some of the bigger, fancier brand names back in the day. When you bought a car from them, they actually only sold you 20% of the vehicle. They sold you a firewall and an engine and a chassis, but you had to take that car to a coach builder and they would build you the rest of the body. So they had standardized practices, even way back then, just to your point about the coach houses, they had standardized, we componentize the car and then we send out the rest, and you can customize from there. And like standardizing is what allowed them to grow and be profitable and so on. And I mean, Rolls Royce is like that's the luxury of the luxury, right? That's what it is.
Absolutely. I'm not a car person, unlike you. I know you love your very nice car. But I generally I want a reliable car that starts when I turn the key. However, if I were ever to pay big money for a luxury car, it would be a Rolls Royce. That would be my dream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Oh, for
You're
sure.
so smooth and quiet and all that. I don't have one, but for the folks who do, I'm sure it's lovely. Yeah.
It's just, to me, the epitome of class. But it's also like, if I get a Rolls Royce, do I need a driver?
You do. You know what's funny is that anybody can have a driver these days. We look back in history and we go, oh man, wouldn't it be nice to live like the wealthy do? Wouldn't it be nice to have a cook? Wouldn't it be nice to have a driver? Wouldn't it be nice to have a tailor? Like, we can all have that today. It's called Skip the Dishes, Uber Eats. It's called, it's called Lyft. It's called all of these ride sharing apps. I mean, we can have all of these things. And if you're actually, this year I got really efficient with my time. I said, okay, where am I spending my time? Where am I spending my dollars? Where am I spending my everything? And I said, do I actually need a car? Do I actually need to cook? Like, what is my hourly rate on an income on an annual basis? And if I divide that out by, 2,000 hours, 3,000 hours, 1,500 hours, however many hours somebody works in a year, you got to say to yourself, how much time do I spend grocery shopping, cleaning the dishes, picking up the spilt oranges, the food that goes bad, making the stuff for myself, running the dishwasher, broken dishwasher. How much time do I spend doing all that versus just ordering something? Mm-hmm. What becomes more efficient with your day? So we can have all of these things. Like, if you have a cottage 2 hours away and you live in Toronto and you want to head up to Muskoka and you hired an Uber to take you up there, I mean, it'd be a couple $100 ride, I'm sure. But if you can be super productive in the back, such as you can make more than $200 in the back seat by making phone calls and sending emails, well, you came out ahead. So really, that was money well spent. You didn't have to drive yourself.
How much would it even have cost if you had a full-time driver to, that would be way more than just paying for the Uber, right? So you are just paying for the Uber whenever you want. The only question is, can you get an Uber back from cottage country?
Sure.
That might be a little harder.
A lot of you know what? You'll take the helicopter at that point. Far more efficient.
Oh yeah, or just have your assistant arrange a car service. There you go.
That's right. That's right. The opportunities there.
I agree with you. You know what? I would be more concerned because I drive quite a bit. I check it on the properties and stuff. I'd be more concerned about the time I spent in it if I didn't spend that time on the phone.
Yes.
It's my debrief time with our project managers and contractors and things like that. That's my debrief time. Tell me what's going on in this property. What are we missing on decisions on this? What do we need to do? What's next? Let's plan ahead. That's my time is driving between sites.
Totally.
That's how I spend the time in the car. So I don't actually have a lot of time in the car for like podcasts or music anymore, because time I do spend in the car now, I'm mostly able to work. And that it's so different driving on a weekend when I'm not calling people on my team. It's like, oh, I guess I should be listening to something. Or
you're like, oh, somebody talk to me. I'm lonely. What's going on here?
Yes. Yeah, it feels like that a bit. Actually, last year I drove down to Florida, like in the winter. And yeah, I mean, just drove straight through, but it was so much easier just talking to people the whole way, like time just disappears when you're talking to people. And it was a good opportunity to like catch up to people, friends and stuff who I hadn't talked to in a while. It's like, hey, I'm driving for the next 20 hours.
Yeah. You ever do that? Just, you know what? I haven't talked to this person since high school. I haven't talked to this person in 2 years. Boom. Let's just give him a shout.
Yeah, exactly. I absolutely do that. It's usually real estate people, to be fair, but definitely catch up with friends that way. So, okay. So we got on a tangent. So you're building armored cars. You had bought your primary, you bought a rental, and then you went, essentially when that ended, you went full-time into real estate.
I did.
And what were you doing then?
Being full-time into real estate?
Yeah.
So we had just finished our primary residence. Like, we did the renovations, learned a whole bunch, because at that time, like, dude, I didn't know anything, right? Like, you've probably heard me say on other shows, like, I didn't know the cost of a 2x4. I didn't know where to buy paint. Like, that was true. Now it's like, okay, what's the cost of lumber? I get it. But like back then, I was saying to myself, okay, I'm a mechanic. I'm good with my hands. If you gave me 5 options of choice, I could probably pick the right solution for whatever problem we're having in this house. But I didn't even know what the 5 options were. So I didn't know. So I had to learn all these things, right? So I spent a ton of time watching HGTV. I spent a ton of time watching like Mike Holmes and Scott McGilvery and like all of these guys, just trying to learn whatever I could. And I would skim through all the episodes and I would watch. But I think the biggest thing was I wasn't watching for entertainment. I was studying. And it's different. Like, you can read a book or you can study it. I was watching these shows to study them so that I could look in the background and see what was happening, right? I wasn't watching it just to say, oh, beautiful reveal. Like that wasn't it. It was like, okay, they put this bathtub in. Why did they put the bathtub in the way they did? Was it on the main floor or in the basement? How did they plumb that? Was there?
I actually learned a ton from Mike Holmes as well.
Yeah.
Like they'd find the problems and they'd explain like, this tub, look how much it deflects at the bottom of it. It's because they didn't put it on a mortar bed. Oh, look, they tried some spray foam that didn't work. They should have put it in a mortar base. Yeah. For example, I remember learning a ton from that too. And it is funny because HGTV is like can be very much for entertainment, but especially I found Homes on Homes in particular was a particularly good show for learning. And you have an HGTV show that you've been on.
Yeah, we did a show. My wife and I did a show a couple years ago now. And it was called Hoarder House Flippers, and we were flipping hoarder houses, which, as the name implies, you can imagine how these places looked inside when we acquired them. And, some of these homes were just like, oh my gosh, how could we take something that's so difficult and, what you see and what you smell is one thing, but then when you go in and you see the other side of it, you're like, oh, you can take something that's not so pretty and make it beautiful again, and that was the whole idea of the show, was to focus on the transformation and to make it nice and say, okay, what can we do within a limited budget to make this thing so? And that's how the show went. It was great experience.
Yeah, that's really cool. And now you went from learning from HGTV to showing people how it's done on HGTV, and that's really cool.
Yeah, pretty surreal experience, really. I mean, the cast, we were the cast, the crew. The crew was fantastic. I mean, some of the people that worked on the show and that were producing on our behalf, like they had worked on the Mike Holmes shows and the Property Guys or Property Brothers and the McGiver shows and like all of these shows, they were very decorated. So to learn from their experiences and to have them drip on us for our episodes was a great experience for sure.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so you learned a lot of this, and then did you start with doing rentals, or were you flipping, or what were you doing then?
Yeah, first rental we did, horrible experience. Good God. So got this thing, realtor calls me. She's like, hey, I got this great deal. Come have a look. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I think you're just trying to sell me something. And she's like, no, just come and have a look. And if you don't like it, don't buy it. I'm like, okay, cool. So I go and I look and I was like, yeah, I think we can make this work. So at that time, you could still buy a house on 5% down, right? A rental property on 5 down. It was like the very tail end of it. So we took like all of our savings and like bought this thing, went in and, I got it fixed up evenings and weekends. And it was great. And I think the biggest thing was that, yes, we were doing the house and yes, I was fixing it up, but I was learning as I went, right? And it's not any one skill that makes a real estate investor successful. It's the stack. It's all of the skills combined. Just because you're a good property manager doesn't make you good with money. Just because you're good with money doesn't make you a good people person. Just because you're a good people person doesn't mean you understand construction. Like, and you keep going down the line. And you got to take all of these things and crunch them together to spit out these things that we all call deals, right? That's just what it is. And at that time, I was learning. I didn't know anything about tenants. So I learned about the construction. Then I learned about tenants. This was before a standardized lease in Ontario. So I had to come up with my own lease. And it was so funny. Like I went to Google. I typed in like lease agreement, tenant, Ontario, and like some mix mash thing came up. And it was all like old fashioned lawyer scripture. And I was like, oh, this looks good. This has got to be the one. So we got that, got the tenants in there. Tenants were great for a little while, and then they weren't so great and freaked me out. And then I had this paralegal call me, screaming her brains out on the phone, screaming. And I'm like, hello? Like, what's going on? What's the problem? She's like, this house is unfit for living. This house is a disaster. Like all of these horrible things. And I was driving home for I think I was driving home for my 9 to 5. Yeah, at this time. And I'm just like, how can this be? Well, then I came to realize, because I wasn't an experienced investor, I came to realize, oh, it's rent day. They got no money. And they have a friend who's a paralegal who was going to college who called me and started barking. And I was like, oh, paralegals don't yell at people. Number one. Right. So I learned that. Number two, I looked this person up. She was in school. Right. All of these things just started to check out. And I was like, oh, so this is really what's happening. Right. It's not me, it's them, but they're putting it onto me. So that was one thing that I learned from like differentiating between, okay, a tenant issue versus a landlord issue. Very, very different. So that was my first deal. Ended up selling the deal. I think we made about 60 grand on that first deal, like 12 months later, just because the tenants had, like I say, they freaked me out. And we made 60 grand. And at that point, I was on the way out of my job and transitioning into real estate. My wife was like, you did really well over here. And now you're not working as a mechanic. Why don't you just go do that full time? So that's how I made that transition. And then the portfolio continued from there.
And that transition was into more rentals at the time?
It was, yeah. So more rentals. So we did the third property was I'm going back, Luke. It's like 10 years. Yeah, it was a rental property. At that time, CIBC was able to qualify a portfolio because duplexes were more the norm. CIBC was able to qualify a portfolio not necessarily based on income, but based on debt coverage ratio if you had 3 properties or more.
Mm-hmm.
Easy, right? So you go in, the property's carried because they were like 200-300 grand, whereas today that same property is like 700,000-800,000. The property's carried a lot better and they could DCR. And because that's how I had to qualify my portfolio, that's what I did, right? So I bought a rental, and then I got hung up with the debt coverage ratio for my 4th property. So I brought in a partner. And because I was on joint title, this was a bit of a maneuver there. Because I was on joint title, then I was able to use that to qualify for the 5th property, and I continued to grow. So it was like, learning all of the different constraints as you work your way up in finance, such that they don't hold you back anymore. How do you make this work? How do you make it so? How do you make this such that you can continue to grow? And if you do or don't want partners, you can make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, so I remember, I don't know if that's the first time meeting you, but we've known each other for quite a while now.
Yeah, we go back. Yeah.
And I'm going to say it was 2017, probably, is my guess. I had started hosting regularly a monthly meetup in Toronto called the Toronto Real Estate Investors Association. We still host occasional events, but I used to host it monthly in Toronto.
That was in the condo tower.
We were in a realtor's office and then moved to a condo tower.
Yeah.
And you came to speak, and at the time you had a very interesting kind of creative duplexing strategy where you had the vertical split rather than the traditional split of bungalow with the traditional horizontal split. You were splitting them vertically. So that's what I remember you speaking about, and that's what you were kind of getting known for at the time. Yeah. Was your vertical split duplexes. Do you want to tell us a bit about that and how that happened? And
sure. This, I didn't know it at the time, but really, to me, doing 2-unit conversions, this was my highest and best use activity before I even knew what highest and best use really was, right? And when I was doing these conversions, I was saying, okay, single family homes don't carry, we got to go 2 units. But I was looking at the 2 units and I was saying, how can it be that the basement unit rents for less and the upper unit rents for more? And how can it be that I get the rents of the basement unit higher without affecting upstairs? Like, how can we make this work, right? Because I don't know, I'm always looking for the edge, because the edge is what gets you ahead. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, so basement tenants pay for less because they have less natural light. Upstairs tenant have more natural light. You can carry unit groceries on the main floor. Right. So how do we split this house up? So I was looking at a bungalow, for example, and most people would cut it up main floor and basement. But I was saying, okay, in a semi-detached house, well, there's a part wall in the middle and everybody has a main floor and everybody has a basement. So like, what if we took that, spun a semi-detached house 90 degrees, at least in theory, where I took that bungalow and put a wall down the middle such that everybody had a main floor and everybody had a basement, and it felt like a semi or it felt like a townhouse. And I did just that. So took a bungalow, put a wall up parallel to the street because I couldn't run it perpendicular to the street with my zoning, right? I put it parallel to the street. So there was a rear unit that had a main and a basement and a front unit that had a main and a basement. Everybody walked in on the main level. Everybody had typically basement bedrooms, right? And main floor living with a kitchen. And the accommodations were spectacular. And when people came to these houses, because I was doing my own property management, I would read them and I would watch their eyes and where did they look, right? And I would watch their mannerisms and how they would speak to their partner. And that's when I really got to understand, okay, when people are coming into these homes, they're really appreciating the fact that A, the rent is on point, and it's for both units, it's the same as a main floor unit would be, right? Which means your cash flow is better. But B, they like the living style better because they have more natural light. They were happier tenants. They were more respectful. They always paid their rent on time. I never had an issue in a vertical split home. It was great.
And actually, one of the biggest issues a lot of bungalow duplex conversions have is noise transfer. When you have one tenant above the other, their dog's barking or they're stomping on the ground, kids are running around, and the tenant below is trying to sleep because they work night shifts or something, and they're just yelling at each other in the end. And that completely gets rid of that problem because you only have the one shared wall down the middle, and it's much easier to divide noise through a vertical wall to separate the noise properly. It's much easier. It's kind of like a townhouse.
Yeah. The sound doesn't attenuate through a vertical wall like it does through main floor basement. And something else that we learned too was most people have to use fire rated pot lights or pot lights in junction boxes, right? Well, we didn't have that problem. We could use standard pot lights because there was no fire separation on the vertical or on the horizontal floor. It was only on the vertical. So there's a lot of little things that you could change in the way that you design the home and the way that you construct it. Now, to be fair, did it cost more? Yes, it did cost more. Sometimes it was about equal, right? Like I was buying the pretty crunchy houses anyways. So, the basement had to be gutted out and the main floor needed a bunch of work. I had to cut in a second set of stairs. Does that come at a cost? Well, sure. But if you're redoing the whole thing anyways, it wasn't so much of a big deal. Sometimes it was comparable, sometimes 10% more, but overall the cash flow is better. And I did have sales where people said, you know what, the cash flow is better on this house. I want to buy it because it carries my mortgage better. And they paid more for that property. So it made sense.
I think your vertical splits were one of the things that have helped me, as I'm look at different ways of dividing up properties myself. It's something, subconsciously in the back of my mind. I know, for example, in Ottawa, lots of cities have different rules. So,
yeah,
Ottawa is a city where, and I believe they're changing it now, but the basement, so the second unit in a duplex had to be 40% of the home.
Oh, that's
unless it was the entirety of a basement. What? Yeah, so basically they would let you do 50% of the house in a bungalow if you took over the whole basement for the second unit. Okay. But if you were trying to divide up a house in a different way, then only 40% of the house could be the basement unit. So you had to have kind of that uneven 60-40 split. Different cities have different rules like that. So, Ottawa, a lot of the times there's just, let's just keep it the basement. But, I'm thinking back on some of the properties I've done. Like we have a split level house. It was built as a split level, probably 60s. So you have, the upstairs has the 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. The main floor has your living, dining, kitchen. And then there's a mostly unfinished basement. And there was a crawl space under the main floor area. Well, attached to the main floor in the 80s, the previous owners had built an addition.
Nice.
About 350 square feet with a full bathroom. And they used it as like an extra family room. It was right off kind of the dining room. So it had a separate entrance to outside and everything. So we looked at that and went, wow. So we can keep the main house as a unit. And then we can take this 350 square foot addition and make a bungalow in one of the cheapest duplex conversions we'll ever do.
Yeah.
We've already got the bathroom. We'll add a kitchen separately, rewire this small space, separately wire for hydro. It's very easy to fire separate because it basically was built outside of an existing exterior wall. Yeah. So you're closing the entryway and making sure there's fire, but it's insignificant, and making sure the crawl space is closed off. So it was one of our least expensive duplex conversions ever. And it's not bad when you can get, $1,200-$1,300 for a 350 square foot bachelor unit plus hydro, which is their main heat source. The main house, instead of, we used to do, when I do a duplex up down, I usually pay the gas bill. So it's usually a shared furnace or boiler. I pay the gas bill. The tenant doesn't. Well, in this case, the main house kept its furnace and the tenants pay the gas bill.
Nice.
And so the only thing I'm paying there is the water bill, and the tenants have their separate hydro meters, and the hydro, with the ductless mini split, is the heat and cooling source for that additional unit. So just, I feel like, you do the vertical splits kind of helps expand the idea of what's possible on some of these units, and seeing something like that. And I love it, actually. I see sometimes when there's large living rooms, like additions, large rec room additions, even no basement, none of that. Yep. I look at that and go, oh, that could be its own unit. Like I see that all the time now. And it's actually like, it helps cash flow quite a bit because you're not spending, a lot of these duplex conversions now are $200,000. But if you can spend 50
bonkers
to turn a living room into a bachelor, even though the rent's lower, it's still proportionately often worth it. And so much, sure, it's so much easier.
Well, think about it. Like $1,200 a month times, 12 times 12 is, what's 12 times 12? I don't know.
Good question.
15 grand? Ish? $1,200 times 12 months? Well, if it's 1,000, that's 12 grand and plus a bit. So call it 15 grand, whatever. Right? If you're a $50,000 spend, just quick math. Right? 12,000 divided by 50 grand, 12, 24, 36, 48.
Yeah. Just over 4 years. Yeah.
25% return on investment just on its own.
Yeah.
Never mind the appreciation of the property, whatever, like all that, just from a cash flow play.
Well, as you can look at it and say, I could get $1,900 for this if I were doing a full, maybe even 2,000, but I'm spending $200,000.
Right.
Where's the better return on your money, right? Sometimes. So
that's right.
Yeah. So I like it. So yeah, I feel like I don't know that I could say all of it is because of you, but I feel like what you were doing and teaching definitely helped expand my mind and what's possible. So yeah, thank you for that teaching.
I like
helping me learn about the highest and best use.
Makes me feel warm and cozy inside. I like that.
So you were doing those, and then you got into a lot more real estate. Tell us more. What else were you doing?
Yeah, I got into development a little bit later in my career. That was fun. I got into some multifamily as well, some flipping. I bought some deals off your wholesale list. That was great. It was really a mixed bag for me throughout my whole career. That I'm continuing to be in, obviously, but it was a mixed bag. So I found when I hit a roadblock with maybe it was rentals, I'd flip a few. Maybe it was a cash flow issue, or maybe it was I'm just emotionally tired of dealing with one particular area in real estate. I'll pivot and go over here. I didn't have staff for my first little bit of my career. So that was, that's how you learn, and that's how I grew. And that's how I learned, what is a rough-in? What is finished plumbing? I didn't know that there was a difference. The plumber gave me a bill after he was half done and he left. And I was like, well, why are you giving me the bill? You're not done. He's like, well, this is because we rough in first, then you guys do what you got to do. And then I come back and then I finish off. And I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I had no idea. So like, I continued to grow and flip. We've done about 70 properties, which you probably do in like an afternoon. But for me, 70 properties so far in the career. And like, like I say, it was a mixed bag. So developments, multifamily, flips, rentals, this kind of thing.
What was your favorite?
Favorite one? Wow.
Well, not just favorite deal, but like, what was your favorite type of investing, would you say, out of all of
Yeah.
bag?
I liked each one for different reasons. So like, for example, development is a pretty good return on time because it's a lot of hurry up and wait. Like, you go and you do the thing. Okay, you get the survey guy there, you get the survey back, and then, okay, it goes to site plan. And then when you're waiting for the site plan, the city has to provide comments. So it's a lot of like, use your creative juices, get this thing as optimized as humanly possible, and then send it out and wait for all those soldiers to come back home, right, to give you some answers. And then you can send it back out again with comments, and then you wait for there's a lot of hurry up and wait. So from a return on time perspective, very, very good. Flipping is good because it's cash. Like it's inputs and outputs. How much do you spend? What's it worth? How do you get it back? That's where the whole napkin numbers formula thing came in, right? Like I was flipping on the back of a napkin. I was like, okay, does this make sense? Does it not? How long is it going to take me? That was great. Infill development, like new construction. I love that. I could build a house with my team. I could build a house in about 80 to 120 hours, including playing the land, right? That's like ground up, new build, new construction, whatever done. I could get it there. Now, for me, like that was a lot of how efficient can I be, right? How much time am I going to spend on doing this thing? And let's just say you spent 100 hours. Well, then in theory, you could do on a 2,000 hour year, you could do 20 per year, right? I would annualize my time and say, what can I do versus how many people do I have? So that was pretty interesting. The duplex rental property stuff, that was great. Obviously, that's slowly changing with interest rates, and they don't carry the same way that they used to, and prices are creeping up. Rents aren't necessarily keeping up, at least in my area.
They've gone up, but maybe not as much as the interest rates. But I mean, that is part of, the provincial government's now required to allow 3 units everywhere. Yep. And from my understanding is the federal government, I think they did this in London, Ontario. They were providing funding to London, Ontario for building housing, but they also required London to change the rules to allow, I think, 4 units everywhere. Yeah. So we may see that across Ontario too, where municipalities are now going to have to kind of get forced if they want this housing funding to allow 4 units everywhere.
Yeah. Sorry? Hamilton did it.
Hamilton did it voluntarily. They weren't forced. Yep. I think Kitchener's always been ahead on some of this stuff. And I think Toronto's allowing 4 or 5 kind of across the board. 5, yeah. I'd like to see Ottawa follow suit. They're really behind on a lot of this stuff. They're really like almost kind of anti-development, anti-landlord in Ottawa. Yeah. It's a little harder to make some of this stuff work, but still, I mean, rents end up pretty high proportion to prices because it's not as easy being a landlord. So there's pros and cons of everything.
It's true. And you know what? When you're looking at a price per square foot on a house, which I routinely don't do, but just for the sake of conversation, adding square footage to any home, whether it be an addition or a top up or whatever, is the most expensive thing you can do to a piece of real estate, typically, right? Adding square footage. So when you're adding square footage, you got to be very conscious of what are you spending versus what are you getting back in terms of rents or, economics. Multifamily is a little different. Infill developments, different again. But when you're looking at the city of Toronto, for example, all of a sudden these great big Victorian homes that are expensive, right? Let's just say they're $2 million to buy this big home. On a price per square foot basis, you probably couldn't even build that house for the same price that you're buying it for when you factor in the cost of the land. So all of a sudden, if you can put 4 units inside of that house plus a coach house in the back, that structure becomes very economical because you're revamping anyways. Now you get a 4-plex plus 1, right? If you're in the small space, these homes are starting to turn over again, and this is what people are doing because the economics are favorable. They just are.
Yeah. And in Toronto, I mean, you can divide something up into quite small units and still get good rents for it. You could have 250 square foot bachelors and still get
no parking, rents. Nothing.
Yeah, depending, as long as there's relatively accessible in other words.
Transit,
yeah. So even if you take a smaller home and divide it up into a bunch of units, if you're allowed to do that. I mean, I'm actually doing a project right now with some partners in Ottawa, and we took, the city said it wasn't a legal duplex, but I disagree. I mean, it was It was a flat roof, up-down duplex,
Yeah.
3 electrical meters, original from like the 60s, from when this thing was built, 3 electrical panels, kitchen right above the other kitchen, bathroom right above the other kitchen, except like at 2 separate staircases, each that went up and down. And what I loved about this, the main reason I wanted to buy this was it's a corner lot. It had a parking on one side that fit, 2 cars wide, 2 deep, so 4 cars, and then a separate parking on the other street for 1 car. So it's like you can park 3 tenants, and this is an area where you'd want to drive without an issue. So instead of adding square footage, I'm taking it's probably I'm going to say a 1,300 square feet per floor.
Yep.
I guess it was 3 bedrooms up and 2 down. I'm turning the downstairs into 3 because there was wasted space, and I'm eliminating one of the staircases. And I'm taking the upstairs and I'm turning what was a 3-bedroom unit into a 2-bedroom unit and a 1-bedroom unit. Nice. And the 1-bedroom unit's going to be under 400 square feet, I'm going to say, and the 2-bedroom's going to be the remainder. And yeah, so I'm going to get, basically I had a 3-bedroom and a 2-bedroom, and now I'm going to have a 3-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, and a 1-bedroom in the same building, in the same footprint. And you can just build these smaller units, as with the parking and the city allowing it. Again, the city said it wasn't 2. I disagree, but regardless, we were allowed converting it to 3 under that zoning. So we did it, and it's almost done. So
nice.
Yeah. And again, splitting vertically with the other unit beside it, like, yeah. There's so many. It does allow a lot more opportunities now that's allowed, and I think there is opportunity in that way, and there will be more. You can definitely build smaller units. You can take an existing if you're allowed 4 units and you don't need let's say parking's not an issue for you, or you have a lot of it, or it transits there, you could take an existing duplex and divide each unit into 2.
Yeah.
And then have 4 units right in that same footprint, right? So there's lots of ways to do it that work. So I think there's still opportunities for that as we can add more units. But something you were good at, and I think something very important for this right now, is being very good at controlling construction costs. Do you want to talk a little bit about how your experience in controlling construction costs and kind of what you found?
I mean, I started off DIYing evenings and weekends, doing it all myself. There was no quote unquote labor cost because I wasn't factoring in my time, right? And I think that's a great way to start and learn, and you understand about what things cost and what things don't cost and where you can find cheap materials. And then as you continue to grow and evolve, you realize, I can't buy everything in Habitat for Humanity, or I can't buy everything on sale. Sometimes you have to put it in the spreadsheet and just order it and move on, right? It depends on your volume. I realized at a certain point that I was actually holding myself back by not having full-time staff. So I said, okay, if I get full-time staff, what do I have to do to substantiate the cost, the expense of full-time staff on an annual basis? And how many deals do I need to do in order to make sure that I fill the funnel such that they always have a place to go to work? So I said, okay, what do full-time staff cost? What does CPP, EI, WSIB, all of these things cost? When you add that all together, what does that mean for me as the employer versus hiring at a sub-trade to come in and do that exact same thing? So for me, I'm looking at all of these things and I'm saying, okay, I'm going to do this many deals per year. I'm going to I always ran with like a really lean small crew. So like typically 3 to 7 people was my go-to. At any one time, the most projects that I had on the go was 15, and the least projects that I had on the go was 1, right? Or maybe none, I guess. But that was kind of my workflow. And of those 15, it was a mix between construction, land development, things like that. So for me, like I was always looking at, okay, what is the highest and best use of like my time and my staff's time, and where can we be most efficient with our costs? So that's how I was looking at it from the labor perspective. From the materials perspective, spreadsheet everything. What does it cost? How much do you spend on a deal? Typical basement might be, 50 grand, 70 grand, 100 grand, 200 grand, whatever it is. And then you can kind of cross compare back to what you spent on the last one. So I would go into the hardware store, for example, and I was the largest account with this particular hardware store. It was a major chain. I was the largest account in this particular hardware store. So when I walked in, they recognized me. It was like Home Improvement when Tim Taylor would walk into the Harry's Hardware and like everybody would gather around. And it's like, everybody's having a beer behind the counter. Well, it's pretty much, there was no beer, but that's pretty much what it was. Like I'd walk in and people would stop what they're doing and they'd help me shop or help me get the deliveries or whatever. So from that perspective, forming the relationship with the people at the hardware store really helped me control my cost because they knew what I was after. They knew what I wasn't after, right? And they knew when I needed something, I needed it now. And if I didn't ask for it right now, it probably wasn't that important, right? And those relationships were huge. That helped me control my costs. T4 staff, albeit more overhead and responsibility, are also more economical than hiring everything out to a sub trade. Because also too, this is something that people forget. When you're doing like a basement apartment, for example, if you hire a sub trade, they're going to charge you HST most likely on that build, right? There is no input tax credit on a basement apartment, which means you pay, as the end user consumer, you pay HST. When you have full-time staff, there are no HST requirements on your full-time staff because they're yours, right? Yes, you have to pay the CPP and the WSAB and all the stuff I just mentioned, but that typically comes out to a little bit less than the HST component. So something to very much consider. That's how I was controlling my costs, is having in-house labor, making sure that I could control the workflow, and then making sure that materials were on point when I needed them, on time, every time.
Yeah. I mean, the HST is a significant amount, but a significant factor, but it is even more significant, the difference between what, someone employed full-time versus subbing out the work. Because even, part of our business, what we do in Ottawa is we have a lot of subs or outside companies that essentially work for us full-time on a day rate, which we break it down to an hourly rate. When you add the tax, it's almost double what some of our, and they might be a little more experienced, but it's almost double what some of our guys cost for our in-house team. Yeah. And that's actually something we've been working on doing. We're actually expanding our kind of in-house construction team slightly. We have kind of, I guess, 2 project managers, a full-time construction manager, and 2 kind of in-house guys on the tools. So small team on the tools, but we actually want to expand that because we are doing such volume of flips in Ottawa that it's very helpful to have the team that you need kind of there, and also being able to kind of direct them. You have more direct control. You can ask a sub to do whatever you want, but if they have another client they want to go to, they'll do that instead. You can, if you have a good employee, you tell them what you need them to do, and it essentially comes back that I need you to do this or you don't work for me. Basically they do what you're asking them to because they're your employee, and you treat them well and everything. But I mean, if they don't do it, they're not going to stay your employee.
Why are you here? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So yeah, I find you have way more control, and it can actually make renovations go way faster as well. So
yeah. And you get to learn the guys and their habits and the workflow and all this stuff. And it's a camaraderie environment too. One thing with a sub that I found is you still have to manage those subs. So if you're going to manage the sub versus managing the employee, you might as well have the upside benefit of less cost with an employee if you're still going to have to go through all of the same exercise, making sure stuff gets done.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So do you want to talk a bit about what you're up to these days?
Land development. So land development, I've been working on that. Again, good return on time for me. This 2023 was actually about doing less. So over the last 10 years, we've done lots of deals and that's all been great. But, that comes at, I don't want to say it comes at a cost, but it does come with a lifestyle shift such that you're always working, right? And I was good with that. 15 hours a day, every day, no problem for 10 years. Great, But at some point you got to say, okay, like what's my return on life here? Like what are we working for? And at some point, as you continue to grow and scale in your career, certain things change. The incremental value of money definitely changes. So like, for example, if you make $10,000 annual income, making an extra $5,000, well, that's a 50% increase in your pay, right? If you make $100,000 annual income, making an extra $5,000 is a 5% increase in your pay. So you have to say, okay, what is the incremental value in making more money to me, right? And for everybody, that's going to be completely different. For me, I said, I need a little bit more life in my life. I need a little bit more hobby, or maybe I want to sleep in one day, or maybe I want to, maybe I just want to go fishing or whatever it is, right? So for me, I said, okay, I got to back off a little bit on the real estate. I need to bring more lifestyle in. And that's the season that I'm in right now. So good return on time for land development, which has been great. Finishing up a few of those projects. We got about 30 units in the pipe, some way, some fashion. So that's good. I've been private lending, which is awesome. Private lending is obviously really good return on time. Now, the returns aren't as good as if you're going to be active, but that's the season I'm in, right? I'm okay with making some money and, providing service to somebody, or making some money and being a lender, or making some money, whatever, just to kind of keep the things going and keep me in the groove and keep me in the industry. But I do know that comes with a financial cost of not having the upside of being active. So something to be aware of for sure. I've been doing some coaching as well, some highest and best use stuff. So yeah, that's what I've been up to this year. It's been great.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's move into the segment where we talk about our best or favorite deal and our worst or least favorite deal that you've ever done.
Cool.
Let's start with your best deal or your favorite deal. What's the best or your favorite deal that you have ever done?
Best deal. I'm on the vein of return on time. So I recently did a flip. It was about 180,000, 170,000 net profit.
Wow.
I spent like 5 hours on this thing. I spent like no time. It was a rock star buy. The work required was super minimal, cosmetic renovation. We were in and out in a couple of weeks, back up on the market. Those are my favorite flips. Cookie cutter renovation, make it beautiful, happy buyer, happy seller, me, highly profitable, low time input. Those are my favorite types of deals. So I would say that one for sure.
Nice. Can I ask, what did you pay for that? How much were the renos and what did you sell it for?
Yeah, I bought it in the twos. Renos were like under 50 grand or something, under 40 grand. Like they weren't that much, and we sold it in the fives. So, I mean, the spread was huge. And obviously, like there's carrying costs and realtor fees and all stuff.
Absolutely. There's a lot of people, even in vacant property insurance, all of that adds up. But yes, it's also, it's one thing to make, 160, 170 grand in profit on a $2 million property versus a 200 and something $1,000 property. So
it's true.
Very impressive.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was able to buy it cash because it wasn't overly expensive, so I was able to reduce some of my carrying costs. Yes, my ROI was lower, but I'm also not doing the same volume that I used to be doing. Right. So if you want a higher ROI when you work with leverage, as some folks may or may not know, the higher the ROI with leverage, the lower you actually make. So you have to roll that money into another deal to bring the actual financial number up.
I think your ROI was still okay on this one.
Oh, we did good. Yeah, we did good. Yeah. But that's something people don't know, right? Like when you're working with mortgages, if you're using debt, your ROI is higher, but your actual income on a deal is lower.
Yeah, you make less, you have more expenses, so you make less money. Absolutely.
That's right.
And if that means you can do a deal that you weren't otherwise going to be able to do, it's worth doing. Mm-hmm. Or if it means you can do maybe 2 deals, assuming they're relatively safe, where you make 60 grand on each instead of one deal where you make 80 grand, that's worth doing. If you don't have any other options, then it does make more sense. Or if your other option would have been lending that money at 12% versus using it in your own deal where you otherwise would have to pay a private.
Yep.
It's actually way safer because you're not taking the risk of somebody else defaulting on their private mortgage. And because you're not defaulting on yourself.
That's right.
So yeah, your risk adjusted return is much higher.
Yes.
So yeah, absolutely. So tell me about your worst or your least favorite deal.
Oh God. My worst deal. I've only really lost money on one house. I came close on 2, lost money on 1. The one that I lost money on was like almost about the same amount of money almost about the same amount of money that I made on this other flip. So it's like it washed itself out. But it's just one of those ones where you thought you were buying right. You get in there, renovation was fine, everything was good, but the market fell apart, right? And like sometimes that's out of your control. So, losing 6 figures on a house, that really sucks. Now, knowing that, I said, okay, what do I have to do to get that money back? Do I have to work smarter? Do I have to work harder? Do I have to be more creative? Like what do I have to do? And I ended up making that money back over the next couple of flips because I set my intention and I set my goal to say, I don't want to lose. Right? I do not want to lose. I'm better than this. This was out of my hands. This was out of my control. This is a market issue, not my issue. Right? But it became my issue because you know what? At the end of the day, I pulled the trigger. That's what it was. So I went and I did a couple more flips and I got that money back. And that was important to me. Right? And I wanted to know that I had the skills, I had the chops to say, yep, we got into some shit. We got into some murky water, but you know what? We can live to fight another day. And that's what happened.
So what lessons would you say you learned on that flip where you lost money?
The renovation was on point, so I wouldn't change that. I would say as much as you think you know the market is out of your control. There's nothing that you can do to change the market other than, like I said, cutting your costs, being more creative with the renovation, being a strategic investor, changing your financing package, those are all inputs overall, but like the market you can't control. The sale price is the sale price. You have to buy below market and sell at market. That's just the rule.
Why didn't you just keep it listed at a higher price where you would have made money?
No, it would have been worse, right? It would have been worse. In this situation where we did end up finally selling it, right? Like we did drop the price to market value as the market corrected and we ended up selling it. But if I had hung on, I probably would still own that thing today.
So what you often hear coaches or real estate investors saying is you need an option B and an option C. Mm-hmm. Why didn't you turn this into a rental property or turn it into an Airbnb? What is your philosophy behind selling it and taking a loss rather than trying to find an alternate use for the property?
Highest and best use of money. Am I going to keep multiple six figures tied up in this thing because I owned it cash too? Right? Am I going to do that? No, probably not. Probably not. Let's just say the house is $1 million and you own it cash, right? Or you could take that same million leverage, we just talked about it, and buy 10 with $100,000 down payment. Well, I don't really care where I make my money, right? I'm sort of agnostic to the fact that some win and some lose, right? But if I sell it and I get my money back, then I can go and do another deal to get that money back. I don't have an emotional tie to the property in a flip, right? A principal residence is one thing. Maybe you love it. Maybe your kids were born there, whatever, right? But this is purely a money-making mechanism. How can we provide somebody with a great product and make money for doing so? That was it. And I don't necessarily care where we make the money. It's just that we make the money. So if I lost it over here and I made more over here, net, you come out ahead. I'm always thinking in annual terms. I do that with time. I do that with money. I do that with expenses. I do that as a business owner, right? Like if you buy a truck, what does that truck do for you on an annual basis? Can you get to your job site? Is it a net positive? Is it a net negative? Can you carry materials? Do you not want to carry materials, right? Do your employees use the vehicle? Like, what do you do, right? And does it allow you an opportunity of tow truck driver, right? That's all they do. They just spend time in the truck.
I'm in complete agreement with that. I think too many people try to think about what's my option B and C on this, and the property doesn't work well as an option B and C, and they forget about what you said. Return on your money, or I think of it opportunity cost of capital. There's an opportunity cost of leaving it stuck in a bad deal. Like, yes, okay, I can turn it into a rental and maybe break even, and hope that one day, 3 years from now, I can sell it and get break even. But okay, so I lost $100K now, instead of leaving it tied up for 3 years. But the money I pulled out of that and the time I got back not dealing with this bad one meant I made $200K over the next 3 years of the time I would have been holding that property, right? You miss out on the opportunity cost of making that $200,000 because you're trying to save $100,000. So I completely agree with you. And just, I was wondering what your philosophy was, and it was the same way.
It's the same, man. It's the same.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you actually had a good saying. I saw it on Instagram, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but you might be able to paraphrase it based on my description. It was something like if you bought a house and the odds were in your favor and you lost, you made the right decision. But if you bought a house and the odds weren't in your favor and you won, you made the wrong decision. Something like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was actually, it comes from a book from Annie Duke called Thinking in Bets.
Thinking in Bets, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, the philosophy is basically, what you said, making the right decision. Even when she's a professional poker player, if you play a hand that has a low chance of winning and you win, you shouldn't be celebrating that win because you made the wrong decision. And same thing, if you play a hand that has a high chance of winning and you lose, you should still be happy with your decision to have played the correct play for that hand. Because if you keep making the correct decision, on average, over time, you're going to consistently win. That doesn't mean you win every time. It's just like you said, you lost on that deal, but then did more deals because you were playing the right cards, you were playing the right hands, and it just didn't work out that one time. But if you keep doing it, it is going to work out. So yes, yeah.
Brilliant. I love that. That's how the casinos win, right? As long as they have a 1% odd or 1% edge, they'll win 51% of the time.
Yes.
And
I mean, it's what is that, roulette? You spin the wheel, you have black, you have red. And I mean, the odds, it all evens out, except
green.
If it lands on
black,
green.
Red, and green. That's the house edge.
Yes, exactly. There's just the 1 out of 100, or 100, I guess there's 101 on a roulette thing. And
it depends. It could be American, it could be European roulette. There's 2 greens or 1 green, but the point stands.
Okay. Yes, that the majority of it, if it was just the red and black, on average you'd break even. But they add that green in, and that's where the house makes its money. And in our case with real estate, it's more like the green is when we lose money. Right? We're the opposite side on the real estate side. With the deals we're doing, if you do it intelligently, on average, you should be definitely well above, losing.
Yeah.
And there's those occasional times where it doesn't work out, and is the majority of the time it will. So yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Let's move on to the next segment of our wrap-up questions here. What has changed about your approach to real estate investing with your experience?
Return on time. Absolutely return on time. I had this conversation with somebody the other day. We were talking about how long it takes to make money versus how much money you actually make, right? And for example, if you flip a house and you make 50 grand and it takes you X number of hours versus if you flip a house and make 38 and it only takes you a handful of hours, I'm at the point right now, right? And that just could be the current season that I'm in. Mm-hmm. I'm at the point right now where I'd rather take the 38 instead of the 50, not because it's obviously not more money, but because it's less time input for me. That's what I'm looking for right now, is really good return on time. 2 years ago, Ryan, 5 years ago, Ryan, 10 years ago, Ryan, I want the 50. I don't care about the time. Doesn't matter, right? I'm in it to win it. That's it. I want to work. I want to make as much money as I can, because at some point, maybe I won't. I'm in that point now where I would rather the better return on time than the higher return on investment personally.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Excellent. If you could go back in time, what's one piece of advice you'd have for a younger you?
Younger me. I don't think I'd change the way that I play the game. So I would say stay true and stay consistent with your values, your core values, your experience, your opportunity. Obviously, if anybody could know what the market's going to be 10 years in advance, well, if the market was higher, you'd buy all the real estate in the whole world on the riskiest financing and all this stuff, but nobody knows, right? So I would say I'm happy with the way that you played the game. And if I had to do it again, I would stay the same.
Excellent. Okay. And the last question is, what is the most overlooked or the most overhyped investing strategy right now?
I'm cautious of Airbnb. I am. I know nothing, and to preface this, I know nothing about Airbnb. I don't own one, right? I think I might have even stayed in one time. I know nothing about Airbnb. But what I do know is that people aren't being conscious of the HST consequence. What I do know is that when people are buying some of these properties, they're buying them on risky financing because they cash flow as if they were a hotel. And if the city bylaws come through and wipe out the Airbnb or the short-term rental opportunity, you're left holding the bag on a very expensive property that you would not have otherwise purchased. So for me, that's what I'm most concerned about.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Ryan. Before we go, can you tell us about your book, where people can find it, about your podcast, where people can find it, and how people can reach out to you if they want to follow you or get in touch with you?
Yeah, so this is the highest and best use playbook, finding the unfair advantage over your real estate competition. I wrote this last year, actually. You can get it on Amazon chapters, Barnes & Noble, thehighestandbestuse.com. And basically the book is about three things: the highest and best use of the land, the highest and best use of the structure, and then the highest and best use of your personal skill sets and time. And for me, I'm looking at all my deals in the past, saying, where did I become the most efficient, or where did I become the best investor, or make the most money, or spend the least time? And those are the three ways that I did it. So that's where people can find it, and that's what the book is all about.
Awesome. Okay, and where can people find your podcast?
Yeah. Okay, so follow me on Instagram at The Highest and Best Use. You can find it on YouTube, Spotify, Audible, iTunes, basically all the major platforms. It's called The Highest and Best Use Podcast with Ryan Carr. So that's where they find it, and that's where they can find me.
Nice. Well, and I was saying before we started recording that I love how you bring on kind of more of a variety of guests than you traditionally see on a lot of the real estate podcasts. And I think that comes a little bit of from your involvement in the development, the infill, building, the construction side of it. So you bring in not just kind of the direct, hey, I'm a real estate investor, but I specialize in selling land to builders to build subdivisions, or I specialize in foundation work, soil work, that kind of stuff. There's kind of intricacies that people don't know about, and having a bit of that knowledge on that. I find your podcasts and some of your guests extremely interesting. So yeah, people should definitely go check that out.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you for the shout, and thank you for having me on the show today.
Thanks for joining us, Ryan. Take care, and we'll talk soon.